Hey there, my name's Chris. I know you're probably thinking, why should I care about your story? Trust me, I get it. If I were you, I'd probably feel the same way. But I promise you, this isn't just another sob story about some guy who had it rough. This is about a journey, one that started with nothing and, against every odd, turned into something worth sharing. I'll take you back to where it all began. I was just a kid when my parents walked out of my life. No explanation, no apology, no reason. Just a note. I don't even remember much about them. My earliest memory was them leaving me at the orphanage when I was just 5 years old. No hugs. No, we love you, son. They just handed me over to people I didn't know and walked out of my life. I never understood why. Was it my fault? Did I deserve it? Those questions haunted me for years, but I never really got answers. The orphanage was a cold place, not because the people there were bad, but because of the system. It was a place where kids like me were just waiting for a chance to be someone's burden or a fleeting hope. You'd think a place meant for care would be different, but it wasn't. I learned that life doesn't really care about your backstory, it only cares about what you can do next. I didn't get much in terms of love, but I got something that, in the end, proved more valuable: grit. You see, growing up in the orphanage, I didn't have the luxuries that most kids had. No loving parents to pick me up when I fell. No one to cheer me on when I finally got something right. But I had time. Time to think. Time to observe. And over the years, I started to learn how to survive in a world that didn't care about me. I learned early on that the world doesn't owe you anything. If you want something, you have to go out and grab it, even if it means taking risks. That's how I started looking at the world, a world full of opportunities that no one tells you about, but you have to discover for yourself. And so, I did. When I turned 18 and aged out of the orphanage, I had no money, no connections, and no plan. I was given a duffel bag full of second-hand clothes and a handful of change as they sent me out into the world like I was some kind of experiment that had reached its conclusion. There's something about being in that position, when you're forced to face life on your own without any support, that wakes you up. The real world isn't kind, and the moment you leave the comfort of a safe, predictable place like an orphanage, you're forced to grow up fast. At first, I did what anyone would do: I survived. I was homeless for a while, picking up odd jobs here and there just to eat. It was a grind. I remember sleeping in alleys and sometimes under bridges, doing whatever I could to get through the night. But every day, I would sit and think, this is not my end. I can't let it be. I had no idea how, but I was determined to get out of this cycle. I started learning about the things that could help me escape the struggle. I would sit in libraries, using their computers to study new ways people were making money. This is where I stumbled onto the world of e-commerce, crypto, and dropshipping. At first, it seemed like a dream. These things were for people who had money, right? People who could afford to take risks. But then I thought, what do I have to lose? I was already living in the gutter. The worst that could happen was I'd fail and be back where I started, but failure wasn't an option anymore. I got my hands on a cheap phone and started researching everything I could about crypto, dropshipping, and e-commerce. I started reading everything, watching videos, joining forums, anything to get a better understanding of the game I was about to step into. I learned about how people were building online businesses, using social media to sell things, and using cryptocurrency to make transactions that could potentially change their financial futures. Now, don't get me wrong, it wasn't easy. I had no money to invest in my ideas. But I was creative. I would find ways to do things for free or with little to no investment. It was all about resourcefulness. I started with dropshipping, which I could run without holding inventory, and then moved on to e-commerce, where I could create small products that people actually wanted. I didn't make much at first, hell, most of the time I was barely scraping by. But I kept learning, and with every small success, I gained confidence. I didn't have the luxury of a safety net, but what I did have was time, hunger, and a desire to prove that I could make it. The first sale I made online was a game changer. It was a small victory, but it made me feel like I was on the right path. It didn't matter that it was a few dollars. What mattered was that I had done it. I had taken my first step out of the darkness. I didn't stop there, though. I kept learning, kept testing my strategies, and started expanding into other areas like cryptocurrency, which, at the time, seemed like a risky gamble. But I had nothing to lose, and it felt like the future was there for the taking. Fast forward a few years, and I'm no longer the kid who was abandoned and left to fend for himself. I'm still a work in progress, but I've built something. I have my own business, my own brand, and I'm no longer struggling to make ends meet. I made my mistakes, but I learned from each of them. The market is always changing, and that's part of the game. But the thing that matters is you never give up, and that's why I'm telling you this story. Because I've been through it all, the struggle, the loneliness, the failures, and I want to show you that it's possible to rise up from even the toughest situations. If you're in a place where it feels like everything is against you, just know that there's always a way out. It's not easy, but the hardest roads often lead to the best destinations. In the end, I'm not just a guy who learned about business and became successful. I'm a guy who learned how to never give up, no matter how dark it gets. So, this is where my story begins. I hope you'll stick around, because it's a journey worth taking. Alright, so you've heard where I came from. The lonely, cold nights and the days spent fighting just to survive. But here's the thing, survival wasn't enough for me anymore. I didn't just want to scrape by. I wanted more. I wanted a life that meant something, a life where I didn't have to wake up every morning with the weight of uncertainty hanging over me. I wanted financial freedom, and I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way but the road to success. It wasn't going to be some straight line. If you're thinking this is where I'm going to tell you about how everything just fell into place, I'm sorry to disappoint you. The reality is, it was messier than that. After the initial spark of that first sale, I thought I had cracked the code. I'd made a small amount of money, and in my mind, I believed that the next step was just to scale. I thought, alright, I can just rinse and repeat, make a few tweaks here and there, and I'll be rolling in cash. If only it were that simple. What I didn't realize was how ruthless the game could be. I started out in dropshipping, selling products that I thought would do well based on trends. At first, I used free tools, organic methods to drive traffic to my store. And sometimes, it worked. I made a sale or two, got a small profit, and thought I was on the right track. But then, the reality hit me hard. The market is unpredictable. Trends change faster than you can keep up, and what's popular today might be irrelevant tomorrow. I began to see that my first approach wasn't sustainable. It wasn't enough just to sell random products and hope that some of them stuck. I needed to learn how to really engage with my audience, find the products that actually solve problems, and understand the market in a much deeper way. I hit a rough patch. My sales started to plateau. The traffic to my store started drying up. I was frustrated, and honestly, I started to question if I was just wasting my time. I didn't have the luxury of giving up. I had nowhere else to turn. So, I doubled down on learning. I started reading books, watching more videos, and seeking out mentors who had been where I was. But even then, it wasn't all smooth sailing. One of the biggest challenges I faced was financial. Even though I was starting to make a bit of money, it wasn't enough to invest heavily in my business. I couldn't afford paid ads, which is what most successful e-commerce stores were doing to scale. I had to be creative, make use of every penny I had. So, I started reinvesting any money I made back into my business. No vacations, no extra spending. Every dollar went into learning, improving my website, and trying new ways to get traffic, and that's when I stumbled onto the next game changer, cryptocurrency. Now, I'll admit, when I first heard about crypto, I thought it was a scam. Who wouldn't? It sounded like a fantasy, some kind of underground thing that was only for tech geeks or financial wizards. But curiosity got the best of me. I started researching. I didn't just glance at it, I dove in. Bitcoin, Ethereum, altcoins. The more I learned, the more I realized this was something I couldn't ignore. It was the future of finance. A decentralized system that could revolutionize the way people made transactions. It felt like a long shot, but I had nothing to lose. I began small. I bought my first Bitcoin, just a fraction of one, but it was a start. The market was volatile, and honestly, I was terrified. I watched the value of my small investment rise and fall, rise and fall. It made me anxious, but I knew that's part of the game. The volatility is what gives crypto its power. I started learning about altcoins, how to read market trends, and how to make smarter moves in this digital space. It wasn't about quick money. It was about learning the patterns, understanding the market, and waiting for the right moment. At the same time, I kept pushing my dropshipping business forward. I started building a brand around my products. I stopped selling just anything that seemed like it could sell. Instead, I focused on one niche, something I could market with a story. I wanted to sell products that actually helped people, not just things they didn't need. The more I focused on what my customers truly wanted, the more my sales started picking up. It wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. But slowly, things began to change. My website traffic increased. My social media grew. I started getting messages from people who appreciated the value I was offering. I began to realize that this wasn't just about the money. It was about building something real. Something that could stand the test of time, but even with some success, life wasn't ready to give me a breakpoint. One of the biggest lessons I learned during this time was about the importance of adaptability. The market doesn't care how hard you work. It doesn't care about your story. It cares about results. So, if you're not flexible, if you're not willing to change and grow, you're going to get left behind. I realized that the e-commerce space was crowded, and I needed to stand out. That meant I had to create better content, better offers, and better engagement. It was about building relationships, not just making sales. I also started thinking about how I could combine everything I was learning. How could I integrate crypto, e-commerce, and dropshipping into one business model that made sense? The answer was simple: I had to diversify. I needed more income streams, more opportunities. I started looking into affiliate marketing, creating my own digital products, and exploring other forms of passive income. I wasn't just relying on one source of income anymore. I was building a portfolio, but as I started making progress, there were times when I felt overwhelmed. The pressure was building. There were days when I thought about throwing in the towel and walking away. But then I reminded myself why I was doing all of this. I wasn't just chasing money, I was chasing freedom. Freedom to live life on my own terms. Freedom from the constant stress of wondering how I was going to make it through the next day. I couldn't let that go. I had come too far to stop now, and so, the journey continued. Slowly, but surely, I was starting to build something that had the potential to change my life. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without its struggles, but I was no longer the kid who had nothing. I was building a future. A future that was mine to shape. The road to success is never as glamorous as it's made out to be, and anyone who tells you otherwise is either lying or just lucky. For me, everything that came after that initial success was built on the back of failure. I didn't just face obstacles, I was crushed by them. But the difference between those who fail and those who succeed is simple: persistence. And that persistence would eventually turn the tide in my favor. By the time I hit the 6-month mark with my dropshipping business, I had learned more lessons than I care to admit. I had made bad investment decisions, bought products that flopped, and got caught up in the hype of trends that didn't last. I lost money, and I lost time. But I kept moving forward. I kept adjusting. I kept learning. It wasn't until I hit rock bottom that I found my breakthrough. I was deep in debt, just barely managing to pay my bills, let alone reinvest in my business. I had made so many wrong decisions, and I was staring at the possibility of failure. There was a moment where I considered giving up. There was a moment where I thought maybe I wasn't cut out for this after all. Maybe I should just find a 9-to-5 job like everyone else, but then something clicked. I remembered why I started in the first place. I remembered the pain of being on the streets, the feeling of abandonment, and how far I had come. The realization hit me like a slap in the face: I was too far in to quit. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for something bigger. Something I couldn't even fully comprehend yet. I started taking stock of everything I had learned up until that point. And I had learned a lot, the most important lesson. Focus. It wasn't enough to be doing a million things at once and hoping something would stick. I had to narrow my focus and really double down on what was working. I was wasting time on products that didn't align with my brand. I was spreading myself too thin with different income streams that weren't generating enough profit to make a real impact. I needed to pick one thing and make it my priority. So, I made a decision. I was going to put all my energy into building a brand. No more random dropshipping products. No more jumping between different ways of making money. I would focus on one niche, and I would build it from the ground up. I was still working with limited resources, still scraping by, still hustling, but I made the commitment to create something people could trust. I started researching my target market like never before. I looked into their pain points, their desires, and what they needed. I wanted to solve problems, not just sell products. I learned that people don't buy products. They buy solutions. They buy the promise of a better life. And if I could make my brand about solving their problems, I knew they would trust me. But there was one more thing I had to do. I had to scale. And to scale, I had to take calculated risks. I started using paid advertising. I knew it was a gamble, but it was a necessary one. I was working with a very tight budget, so I had to make sure I was getting the most out of every dollar. I started with Facebook ads, targeting specific demographics and interests that matched my audience. The first few campaigns were disastrous. I wasted money, and I didn't understand how to optimize properly. But I didn't give up. I started testing different ads, analyzing the data, and figuring out what worked. Slowly but surely, I began to see results. My sales started to climb. The returns were slow at first, but they were steady. That's when I realized something: scaling wasn't about going all in and hoping for the best. It was about testing, refining, and adjusting. I could take small steps forward, each one building on the last. At the same time, I was working on my cryptocurrency investments. I started applying the same principles to crypto that I had learned from e-commerce: patience, research, and adaptability. I knew the volatility of the crypto market could be a problem, but I also knew that it was full of potential. I started to trade smarter, learning how to spot trends and understanding when to buy and sell. I wasn't making a fortune, but I was making steady gains. It felt like progress, and that's what I needed. But even with all the progress I was making, there were still challenges. The pressure never fully went away. The anxiety of not knowing if this was going to work out or if I was just wasting my time was always there. I was still barely scraping by some weeks. And the loneliness, that was still present, too. I didn't have a mentor to guide me. I didn't have a support system. I was doing this alone, figuring things out as I went. Then came the day that changed everything. It wasn't a big win. It wasn't a sudden, massive surge in income. It was just a moment of clarity. I was looking at my business stats one evening, just after a late night of running ads and updating my website, and I realized that I had made a breakthrough. My efforts were starting to compound. The hard work was beginning to pay off. My brand was growing. My crypto investments were solidifying. I had a solid stream of income coming in. It wasn't life-changing just yet, but it was enough to let me know I was on the right path. I could feel the future shifting. The thing I had worked so hard for, success, financial stability, the ability to live life on my terms, wasn't a distant dream anymore. It was becoming a reality, but the journey wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next challenge would be keeping up the momentum. The next challenge would be staying consistent, continuing to innovate, and finding ways to scale even further, and I was ready for it.